Hey, welcome back to this bootcamp series. In this video, we're going to do two main things. So first, we're going to learn how to push or deploy a Node or Express app up onto the web using a service called Heroku. Once we've finished that, then we're going to change gears and learn how to push an app up onto the web using a completely different approach that's commonly referred to as serverless. In order to accomplish that, we're going to use the popular service called Netlify. Now, to be clear, before we move forward, this video assumes that you already know the very basics of setting up a server using Express, right? And now you just want to know how to push or deploy it up onto the web so that you could share the URL with your friends and family, right? Instead of it just being localhost 3000 up in the address bar. Okay, and finally, before we really get started, I want to show you this GitHub repo. So you can find a link to this in the description of this video. But essentially, you'll see two folders, this O1 Heroku and O2 Netlify. So throughout this video, we're not going to write all of the code together. I feel like that would be missing the point of this video and make the video way too long. So for the first part of this video, when we're working with Heroku, just know that all of the code you see me talking about or pushing up, it's coming from this folder, this O1 Heroku folder. So you can find a link to this in the description. Then in the second half of the video, when we learn about Netlify, again, all of that code is just coming from this O2 Netlify folder. So you probably just want to download this entire repo, and then you'll want to create individual repos for each one of these folders in your own personal GitHub account if you want to follow along. Okay, now having said all of that, it's time to get started. Let's begin with Heroku. Okay, so first, let's see how to use the Heroku service to host a Node application. So just visit the official site, it's heroku.com, and then go ahead and sign up for a completely free account. Shouldn't even cost you a single penny. I won't walk you through that. You can pause this video and then come back and resume this video once you have your account. Okay, so here I am logged into Heroku, and just again, to be clear, you definitely don't need to spend any money. You can use their totally free plan. Anyways, you should be able to get to some sort of logged in dashboard that looks like this, and then we just want to create our first app, right? So create a new app. So there's that button. There's also this option up here to create a new app. Okay, once you click to create a new app, you do need to come up with a unique name. So for example, if I just type in Express app, I can almost guarantee that's already been taken. Yep. So Express app is not available. So you'll need to add on some random strings or just come up with sort of a creative name that no one has used before. Maybe I'll call this YouTube Express Lesson. Cool, that's available. So it's up to you to pick a unique name, and then we just click Create App. Okay, now that we've created this new project or app, we need to send Heroku our files, right? Our actual Node and JavaScript application, all the code that we wrote. So there are several ways to do that. You can use the official Heroku CLI, but I think it's about 1,000,000 times easier to just connect your GitHub account to your Heroku account. That way, all you need to do is push your files up to a GitHub repo. So you can see in this tab, I've already created a new GitHub project called Express App, and I've just pushed my files into there. But now it's a matter of giving Heroku permission to access my GitHub account. So you can just click this GitHub button, connect to GitHub. It might open a new pop-up window, and the window might be fairly small, so look around for it on your desktop, but just be sure to give Heroku permission to access GitHub. Okay, once you give it permission, then it's going to ask you to choose a repo, right? Which specific GitHub repo do you want to use as the source code for this new Heroku app? Now, before you choose one, I do want to walk through a few changes you need to make to your code in order for your Express app to work on Heroku. So there are just two main changes you need to make. First of all, in the root of your project, right? So these are the files for my Express app. We've already learned about the basics of Express. But in the root of your folder, you need to create a brand new file named uppercase P proc file. And there is no .file extension. It's just uppercase proc file. Just the P is uppercase. Inside this file, all you need to do is say web : and then whatever command to actually start your application. So in our case, right, in the command line, you usually run node and then the name of your Express file. That's it. So we're giving this file to Heroku because they're going to run our application on their hardware. So they need to know the command to actually get it up and running. So this is all you need in that file. So that's the first change you need to make to your project. The only other change has to do with the port number. So for example, in your Express file, right, the main file where you're using Express and setting up different routes, down at the very bottom, you usually call app.listen, right? And we've been using a port of 3000. Well, that makes sense for our local computer, but we don't know exactly which port number the Heroku service wants to use. So we're using the environment variable of Heroku, right? process.env.alluppercase_port. And then I've set this up so that our app will continue to work locally where I do want to hard code it to 3000. So if this doesn't exist, which is the case on my personal computer, then we're saying or use this. But this will exist once our app is up on Heroku. So just make sure to make your port number flexible like this, and that's it. Those are the only two changes you need to make, and now your app can live up on Heroku. So at this point, you would just want to push your latest code up to a GitHub repository. Okay, and then with those changes in place, then back in Heroku, you can now connect your repo of choice to this new Heroku app. So personally, I've already created this repo in GitHub called Express App. So that's what I'm going to search for here. It's asking me which repo. So you can just search for some sort of keyword, click search. There it is, right? Express App, and just click the connect button. Okay, if we scroll down a little bit, yes, I do want to enable automatic deploys. I think this is a great feature. So now, in the future, anytime I push a commit to that GitHub repo, Heroku is going to automatically rebundle up and redeploy our app up onto the Heroku servers using our latest codes. So I'm going to click Enable Automatic Deploys, and then if we scroll down just a little bit more, this is sort of the one-time first initial push or deployment. Let's just go ahead and click this Deploy branch. So once you click that, it's then probably going to take anywhere from 10 seconds to 40 seconds. You can see it's giving you a summary of what's going on, but very soon we will now have an app up on the web that we can share with our friends and family. So through the magic of video editing, I'll edit out maybe the next 10 or 20 seconds. Okay, we see that it eventually finished, and then you can click either this button to view your site, or back up at the very top, you can always click this Open App link. So let's go ahead and view this site. Cool. So notice up in the address bar, instead of localhost 3000, I now have this address that I could copy and paste and share with my friends and family, coworkers, anyone that has an internet connection can now visit this app that we built. Well, we didn't build this exact application together, but you get the point. You've learned the very basics of setting up an Express server, and you can now deploy it to the web. Really quick, I do want to show you one other cool feature that Heroku offers. So back in our code, if you look in our package.json file, inside the scripts area, if you have a script named build, Heroku will see that, it'll notice it, and it'll automatically run that task on their hardware before pushing the final files up onto their servers. Now, in the real world, you'd always want to test your code locally on your machine before pushing it up, but this is a pretty cool feature. So for example, in my command line, I don't have Webpack or anything running to actually process my React or front-end code. However, if I go into my React main app file, and for this large headline of our amazing app with 1 exclamation, if I change that to 3 exclamations and save it, now obviously since I don't have Webpack or anything watching this file, that didn't actually update the bundled file that the browser will use. But if I go ahead and push this up to my GitHub repo, I won't bore you with that. Let me edit that part out. Okay, so I just pushed that up to GitHub. Now back in Heroku, in the main overview screen, under latest activity on the right-hand side, you can see that it's currently in the process of rebuilding and redeploying our code. I just waited maybe 10 seconds off camera. And now if I go back to my website and refresh, Awesome, we see all three of those exclamation marks proving that Heroku ran our npm run build task for us. That may not seem like a big deal, but it allows you to set up all sorts of cool automation. And just a quick side note, if you're using this same Express code from the GitHub repo that I showed at the very beginning of this video, then you can click on this secret link here. And to test this out, the username is John Doe, and the password is QWERTY, so QWERTY. So if you get that correct, you'll see the sky is blue, and the whole point of this is just a proof of concept. This text of the sky is blue, this does not live in the client-side JavaScript. Instead, this is being sent from the server side. So you could imagine if this was some sort of secret or private data, right? So it's password protected. We'll circle back to this example a little bit later on in the video. Okay, at this point, let's talk a little bit about the shortcomings of Heroku. So Heroku is great in the sense that we set this up for free. However, you get what you pay for. And what I mean by this is if no one visits our website for the next 30 minutes, I believe it's 30 minutes, they might have changed it, but if no one visits our website for a while, Heroku will put our app to sleep, or it'll sort of shut down the hardware that's running it. Now, they don't do this with the paid plans, they only do this with the free Heroku accounts. Anyways, if someone then visits our website, they'll have to sit here and wait for maybe 10 or more seconds while the server sort of reboots or powers back on. Or I should say, while Heroku spins up a new instance using our files. Now, for educational purposes, this isn't a big deal, and for the price of free, we really can't complain. However, if you really need to host an app and it's not about just you learning and you really want an app up on the web and you don't want your visitors to have to wait 10 seconds for it to spin up, the question becomes, what are your options? So Heroku does have, I believe it's a $7 a month plan where it would remove that downside of Heroku. So that would be one way to go. Or for just $5 a month, there's a lot of really popular hosting options. So right now I'll show you the big three. So the big three I would say are DigitalOcean, Linode, and I believe it's pronounced Vultr, but maybe it's Vulture, I'm not sure. But all three of these companies offer $5 a month plans. And the biggest strength of these, I would say, is also their biggest weakness. Really, it just depends on the angle you're viewing it from. So these services expect you to be a bit knowledgeable in terms of Linux or just sort of DevOps in general. Now, this is great because you have full control over the computer that you're hosting your apps on. Well, it's not a real physical computer. I believe it's just sort of a virtual machine they're giving you access to. But you can install any Linux packages you want. And you actually have persistent storage. So you can store files on the hard drive from within your Node application. We cannot do this in Heroku. In Heroku, the file system is sort of ephemeral, meaning every time you push a new change to your code to Heroku, it's going to completely wipe out that old version of your site, and it's going to spin up an entirely new one, meaning the only files that will exist are your source code files. So any files like user-generated or user-uploaded files that you stored on the hard drive, those will be completely deleted and wiped out. So in order to have any sort of persistent file storage with Heroku, you would need to connect to some sort of file storage service like AWS or something along those lines. Where on DigitalOcean, Linode, Vultr, you have complete 100% control over the computer or the virtual machine that you're setting up. So you have persistent storage, you can install any sort of caching packages, really any Linux package that you want, you have complete control. So this is the upside, but the downside is that requires a good amount of knowledge, practice, and education just in terms of DevOps and Linux, those sorts of things. Now, this is a coding bootcamp, not a DevOps bootcamp, so I'm not going to walk through that with you. It is a lot of fun to learn about, though, so I encourage you to maybe look up a YouTube tutorial on DigitalOcean Node app or Linode or Vultr Express app. But big picture, that would be a $5 a month option, just something for you to consider. Now, however, for the remainder of this video, I'm actually going to talk about an entirely different free approach. That's right, $0 per month, and this is going to be the serverless approach. and we're going to use the service called Netlify. So this is radically different from both Heroku and DigitalOcean, Linode, and Vultr. With Netlify, we don't actually run a Node app like an Express server. Instead, in many ways, Netlify is just like GitHub Pages, right? It can only host static assets like HTML files, CSS, JavaScript, and images, right? So Netlify itself cannot host a Node application like an Express app, just like GitHub Pages cannot do that. However, the huge difference is that even with the free Netlify plan, it comes pre-configured with access to AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, and their really popular tool called Lambda or Lambda Functions. But what in the world is a Lambda function? Well, if we look at the official AWS page, we see that you can run code, and they should say server-side or secure private code, run code without thinking about servers. Pay only for the compute time you consume. What this means is that as developers, you and I, we stop thinking about the server as this holistic item, and instead we start thinking in terms of individual functions. Now it says pay only for the time you consume. However, Netlify offers a free plan that comes with a very generous amount of AWS Lambda function calls. So for our purposes, in terms of what we're going to pay for, we're going to pay $0.00. Essentially, just like earlier when we sent our code through a GitHub repo over to Heroku, we can give our code to Netlify and we can have a special folder. We can name it whatever we want, but maybe we'll call it functions or my functions. And we can have private server-side code in those functions. So we could have our secret passwords to a database somewhere. Anything that we don't want to have on our client-side JavaScript, right? We can have a trusted environment to run our server-side code. So we write these functions, and then Netlify will take those functions, send them over to Amazon Web Services, and they'll do all of the hard work for us. So Netlify will pre-configure the API gateway, really all of the AWS complicated stuff that you need to have a PhD in AWS to even understand, and we will end up with a URL or endpoint that we can use anywhere we want. So we could call it in Postman, we could call it in the web browser, we could call it in an iOS or Android app. We'll end up with a URL, and when someone visits that URL, our server-side function code will run on Amazon's hardware, and inside that we can do anything we want. The beauty of this is that we don't need to think about servers, we just think of these individual functions. So let's say our website all of a sudden gets 1 million hits all at once. Well, that would crash your typical server like Heroku on one dyno or DigitalOcean, Linode, or Vultr. However, if we're using Netlify and AWS for Lambda functions, if AWS detects all that millions of hits in the traffic, they will automatically just start running our functions on more hardware to keep up with the demand. So this serverless approach can scale infinitely and it can scale effortlessly. It just requires us to think of things in a slightly different way. So at this point, I've already written code for us. So back on this GitHub repo, YouTube, Heroku, Netlify, this O2 Netlify folder, I've already written an example serverless application for us. So for the remainder of this video, what we're going to do is we're going to use this code and we're going to sign up for a Netlify account and we're going to see how we can accomplish everything that we would maybe do in an Express app, only this time we're doing it in a serverless fashion. So first, let's go ahead and sign up for a free account. So from the official netlify.com site, you can just click sign up. There are several different ways that you can register for an account. I know that personally, a lot of times I like to use an email address instead of tying my account to a different account. However, in this particular case, since we're going to want Netlify to have access to our GitHub account anyways, I really recommend just signing up with your GitHub account. This way you don't have to sign up with a new username and password. It'll just be tied to your GitHub account. Anyways, I won't walk through the registration process in detail, so go ahead and pause the video and then come back once you have a free Netlify account. Okay, once you have an account and you're logged in, you should see a dashboard that looks something like this. Now, before we move forward and create a new Netlify app or project by connecting it to a GitHub repo, I first want to show you the code that we need to write that is unique to Netlify or this serverless approach. Now again, just to review the code that I'm about to walk through with you, I'm pulling this from this repo, and specifically this O2-Netlify folder. So big picture, you'll just want to take the contents of this O2 folder, and you'll want a GitHub repo with just these files. But anyways, let's sort of review the bird's eye view or big picture of these files and see what is unique to this Netlify or serverless approach. Okay, so first of all, in the dist folder, we just have a static traditional HTML file. We have a little bit of CSS. Where it gets interesting is this my functions folder. So inside this folder, I have two files, animal.js and topsecret.js. And these are the functions that I want to run on Amazon's hardware. So it's going to be server-side, and it's going to be a trusted environment where we can have secret server-side code. Like, for example, right, I'm checking to see if the incoming username is John Doe and if the incoming password is QWERTY. Or you could connect to a database here, and you could have your connection string with your password in here. This is a safe, trusted environment. This will not be visible or ran on the client side. It'll be ran on the server side by Amazon. Now in the real world, you'd still want your passwords or API keys or connection strings to live in environment variables instead of in your source code. That way, if your GitHub repo was accidentally set to public or leaked, your security codes wouldn't actually be leaked. However, that's getting outside the scope of this video. The point is that this function is going to run in a trusted environment. So this code is sort of similar to the code we've been writing in Express. The difference is, instead of listening for different routes, this file as a whole is sort of its own separate route. We'll see how this comes full circle in just a minute, but essentially, Netlify and AWS will make a URL available to us. And when you hit up that URL, this function, this Node JavaScript code, will run on Amazon's hardware. So inside this function, it's up to us to return a response object. So a status code of 200 means success, and then body is just the data that you want to respond with. So if someone types in the correct, John Doe and QWERTY, then I'm sending back a message that says the sky is blue, status success. Otherwise, if they get it wrong, I'm saying message, you are not authorized to access this data, status failure. Okay, we also have a file in this functions folder called animal.js, and you could use your imagination that inside this function, we actually may be connected to a database somewhere and pulled ultra dynamic fresh data. Now, in reality, I'm just hard coding a bit of JSON as a response, right, depending on the final segment of the URL, but you get the idea. Imagine this was actually connecting to a database using our private password and connection string. Point is that this code will run in a trusted private environment. Okay, now there's nothing special about this name of my functions that this folder is named. You could name this folder anything. And this ties into this file named netlify.toml. So this is our configuration file for Netlify. And you can see on this line, I've given it the name that I want to use for my functions folder. So this would need to stay functions, but you could change this to anything. Now there are all sorts of different Netlify configuration settings that you can use. This is just a quick example. Netlify's documentation is amazing. Essentially, I'm saying my source code lives in the root of this folder. The public folder that I actually want to push up onto the Netlify servers lives in dist, right? So that's what has my static HTML and CSS. Then I'm giving it my command. So anytime new changes are pushed to my GitHub repo, Netlify will automatically run this command for us. It'll automatically bundle up our React or any code that we need Webpack to create. And that's really it. You can also see I've set up a redirect because again, Netlify is just serving up static assets. So if someone visits anything other than our static index.html, they would receive a 404 error. However, I'm using client-side routing using React Router. So if someone visits /animal/meowsalot or anything, right? I'm saying any incoming URL, just redirect it or serve up our index.html. So this way, we're not doing routing on the server side. We're doing routing on the client side with React. And really, that's it. The only unique code here is our Netlify config file and our Lambda functions folder. That's it. So at this point, make sure you have these files in the root of a folder. Go ahead and push it up to your GitHub account. And then let's connect that inside of Netlify. So back on the Netlify dashboard, let's click this New Site from Git option. Okay, let's scroll down. I'm going to choose the GitHub option. Okay, I've already given my Netlify account access to my GitHub account, and I'm interested in the particular repo called Netlify project. So again, you'll want to create a new GitHub repo with that particular code we just looked at. Click that, choose that repo. Okay, this looks good. Just use the main or master branch. Scroll down. Yes, we want our build command to be npm run build. So it's reading these values from that configuration file that we already provided. Let's go ahead and just click deploy site. Okay, so it's going to take anywhere from maybe 10 to 30 seconds. Let me go ahead and fast forward through video editing. Okay, cool. So you can see this message changed from site deploy in progress to now an actual URL. So yours will be different from mine, but if you go ahead and open that up, there we see our application. Now again, this is using React Router, so I can click between these different links. Cool. And let's try out the secret tab. So if I get this wrong on purpose, cool, we see that is incorrect. Try again. But if I say John Doe and a password of QWERTY, submit. Cool, the sky is blue. Now this just proves the point that this code, this value of the sky is blue, this did not live anywhere in our client-side JavaScript. This came from server-side code that Amazon ran on their hardware. So you could use your imagination and pretend that this was some super private, secure data. Cool, but let's talk a little bit about how those functions are actually working. So for example, let's take these animal pages, for example. If we go back into our Netlify dashboard, and for the current project you're working on, if you click on functions up in this top navigation, you can see that I have two Lambda functions. So remember back in the code, in my functions folder, we have animal and top secret. So you can choose between those down here. Let's take the animal one, for example. Okay, once you click on that, it gives you the endpoint. So if you copy this address, I wish they would make it a clickable link, but they don't. So you actually have to select it and copy it. Okay, but if I copy that into my clipboard, now I could view that in a new tab in my browser, or I could even use Postman and just perform a GET request to that address. And you can see it just sends back. Whoops, I actually see a message, animal cannot be found. That's because at the end of this, I want to add on slash, and then I hard-coded fake results for meows a lot, barks a lot, and purrs loud. So if I add on slash meows a lot at the very end, send a request, you can see it just sends back raw JSON. So that's the general idea. You write a node function, you give it to Netlify, Netlify gives it to Amazon, and then Netlify has this sort of proxy URL that we can visit. Now behind the scenes, this will call that Amazon function, and we just receive whatever it sends back. Now obviously this first part of the URL will be different for you, but then it's .netlify.app, and then for your cloud functions, it's .netlify/functions, and then whatever you named your function file. But that's really all that's going on, right? So if we changed this to a post request, and we changed the last section to be /functions/top secret, and then make sure our headers are set to content type, and set the value to JSON, application/JSON, and then click into body, click raw, and then just send it a JSON object where username is John Doe, password is QWERTY, send a request. Cool, it sends back, message, the sky is blue, status success. So that's the exact same thing that's going on in the browser. It's just that instead of me manually creating the request in Postman, our React application and the Axios package is sending off those requests, right? But big picture, the idea is that Netlify gives you these very easy to use, these universally useful endpoints or URLs, and it's up to use them however you see fit. Now to review, back in those functions files, so if we look at topsecret.js or animal.js, you can do anything you want in these files. You could look up data in a database, you could look up data from another API, you can just give it an asynchronous function, and then you just return a response object. Now, in addition to status code and body, you can do other things. You can send over custom headers. You can do all sorts of things that you would do with a typical HTTP response. And I encourage you, if this interests you at all, to check out the Netlify documentation. I've always found it to be super helpful. One quick tip that I will share, I know we haven't learned about databases yet in this bootcamp series. That's actually the next topic we're going to learn in our very next video. But if you're already familiar with databases and you try to connect to one within a Lambda function, be aware that you do want to close that database connection before returning your response object. Hopefully that saves you a lot of frustration. I know that when I was working with a MongoDB database for the first time within a Lambda function, with MongoDB, typically it's a common practice to just leave that connection open ongoing. But when you're dealing with a Lambda function, that's not the case. You definitely want to close the connection each time. Otherwise, your Lambda function will just run on forever and time out and fail. Anyways, that does bring the technical aspect of this video to a close. So where do we go next from here? Well, let's actually pull up the chapters graphic for this entire bootcamp series because I have some good news. So for the last few videos, we've been in this servers chapter. But really, for the last few chapters, you might have been getting frustrated that all of our examples were using fake, simplistic data, right? And it's almost like everything we've been doing doesn't feel real world. And there's a reason for that. It's because we haven't learned about databases yet. And the good news is that in our very next video, we're going to start learning how to work with a database. I think taking this next step should be a lot of fun. As always, if you're enjoying this bootcamp series so far, I'd appreciate it if you could share the link with your friends and family. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.